So I don't know if you know this or anyone else in here knows this, but Thursday, 2 days from now, is the 4-year anniversary of the actual escape. So I think we're doing this at the right time.
I think I should have known that, but I
You
forgot.
should have just said yes. So, so how familiar were you with the case before you joined the show?
I live in New York City, so the escape was in upstate New York, and but it was making national news. So I was very aware of it. I mean, it happened the summer they escaped on June 5th, the summer of the election. So there was dual things competing for our attention. But,
Yeah.
But I was I remember it when it all sort of came to me in script form. The details started coming back to me. I mean, I knew all about Joyce Mitchell and whatnot, but the rest of the details were all there in the script, and I became much more familiar with with them once I took on the job.
So how did you get involved with the show? You just sent the script? Did Ben Stiller call you?
I knew the producer who I'd worked with, Scott Hornbacher, who had done The Sopranos and Mad Men. Neither of which I worked on, but I did a pilot episode for another TV show, and he had come on, and so he was interested in having me, and so I got the script. At first, I wasn't sure that it would be something that I wanted to do, but I said, let me read them, and on page 4, I knew this was smart material, and so I just kept reading.
What was on page 4?
It was this interchange. It was just the show opens with Joyce Mitchell, who's Patricia Arquette, and Bonnie Hunt, who has played the Inspector General. Just the relationship, just the way those two women were being introduced in the show, and the dialogue between them. I just thought it's just very well written. I was just immediately engaged in the characters, and then it just kept going. I mean, that was just the characters drew me in, but then the specifics of the escape and the details, and eventually just reading all of this, I thought, I have no idea how I would pull this off, but it got me to get onto a Skype interview with Ben Stiller, who directed the show, and that went well, and then the next thing I know, I'm spending time in prison for a year and a half. So it was a lot.
Yeah. Well, I know you guys weren't even allowed to tour Clinton Correctional until like weeks out. So how were you prepping?
Initially, the Department of Corrections wanted nothing to do with us in the state of New York because it was not their shining moment in their history. So I started looking at a lot of other locations that I could turn into a prison. We eventually found a prison in Pittsburgh that had been decommissioned that we explored and ended up shooting there for the locations that were inside the perimeter wall, exterior locations. Eventually, Ben engaged the governor of New York, Governor Cuomo, initially to get permission to just shoot in the manhole. We were going to shoot in the real town of Malone. A lot of the locations, we shot in real locations. The manhole had been welded shut for obvious reasons at that point, so it was really, we were at that point trying to figure out very complicated ways to use special effects to shoot at the actual intersection with the manhole, but incorporate digital effects to get in there, and they were just proving to be complicated enough so that Ben went to the governor, and the governor has the power to open up the manhole, and then was able to, through the course of that, encouraged us to shoot further in the real prison. We only ended up shooting in something called the North Yard, which is this amazing sort of gladiator space that occupies the rear of the prison yard. That was the spot that we also ended up shooting in there, that I was on the last throes of designing how we would build this as a set, this incredible,
and it was like you came to a rescue.
terrorist thing, and then the governor came to the rescue for that. So we ended up shooting there. So eventually, through the course of that, we got this amazing tour of the specific spots in the prison, the tailor shop and the cells and the catwalks, and we didn't go into the tunnels, but we saw enough. Wasn't allowed to carry a camera or anything in there, so I just had my pencil and a notebook, and I was just feverishly sketching and using the pad as a measuring device, just
Were you afraid you were gonna
bars,
like miss a detail and like?
I was just trying to take mental snapshots of everything. It was emotionally and mentally exhausting to spend time in that prison and just to try to memorize it as much as I can and scribble so that I would be able to determine what my scribblings were later.
So you recreated those, like the actual cells?
We built
the
we built the entire cell block, which was called the honor block. Considered shooting some of that on location. I mean, the wide stuff, and then we would have built, smaller cells would have been the thing that made sense. But there's only so many that are empty that you could go in, and the specifics of what had to happen. It wasn't just a narrative that took place in a prison. It was very specific about what happened with them cutting out and being able to communicate with themselves. So it had to be very specific architectural elements that like steel cells, because they cut through the back. They communicated to each other because the cells just had bars. So the one actual cell block that I looked at was brick construction, the cell. So it's just, you couldn't establish that and then go into anywhere else. So it became pretty clear pretty fast that we're just going to build the entire thing, because then they also go through the back and into the catwalks, and it was a pretty massive set. It filled the entire stage.
So they were all pretty much connected because it's a whole block.
Everything was connected. Yeah, it was 60 cells. It was 3 stories tall, and then the catwalks behind the entire thing 3 stories down.
It was its own prison. So.
It was its own prison, and it felt like prison, particularly once it was occupied by ex-prisoners.
So how closely did your reproduction hew to the actual cells from your memory or your sketches?
It was a pretty much replication. I mean, we reduced the size of, we had the limitations of the stage, and then, my own flourishes that I wanted to put into it.
What were those?
Just the shape of a staircase and something that would lend itself to be more, and it's sort of a combination of other corrections officers' offices and things like that, but pretty much it's pretty standard architecture. And then there was the budgets and the physics and all of that.
So because I don't think anyone who watches the show would think like you shot that over like multiple locations or like it's a soundstage. I feel like when you see it, there's a real sense of place, and it seems like you shot like in the prison. So what were the challenges of maintaining continuity throughout multiple locations like that?
It was difficult. I mean, it was a 119-day shoot that we shot in reverse order because we started shooting in August. So we had to shoot the escape first, everything in the Adirondacks, because we were racing the leaves, and we were literally moving south through the state as the leaves were changing, and so just maintaining all of that. It's just authenticity was just of utmost importance. I mean, for Ben, for all of us, we just wanted to recreate it as closely as possible. But yes, the prison was spread out between the real prison upstate, the stages that we had in Queens, New York, Staten Island was additional sets, and the Pittsburgh prison, and then other interior, the interrogation room. We just had to keep track and cobble it all together. I like to always put as many locations up on a wall just in a way that anybody could just sort of self-tour, but it just is the way that we can just visually, anytime we walk into that room, make sure that it's all being cohesive and just a color palette that we sort of the prison itself and the locations lent themselves organically to just the sense of all the greens that we had in there. But then my design hand just sort of pushed it a little bit more. That's when we had fun to put them in other places. Literally, Joyce's house was painted out of the same can of paint as the cells, the living room and things like that, to connect them. She was in her own prison.
Trapped in her house, yeah.
Exactly.
Her life. I think the centerpiece of the show is the first 9 minutes of the 5th episode when Sweat does his test run of the escape, and it's just a fantastic, suspenseful sequence, and there's so many elements and so many spaces he's in. So can you break that down? Like, how did you guys design that and shoot that? Because it looks like it's one take, but I know it's stitched together from multiple
it was spread out
takes,
over, I can't remember how many, between sets we built, and we shot in actual tunnels in the basement of the Pittsburgh prison, and there was a water treatment plant in Yonkers, New York. Multiple areas within the stage because we couldn't put a basement in, so we sort of stitched between different places. The inspiration for that came from a GoPro video that the authorities actually did through, which we had access to, and quite honestly, I don't know if it was in the original concept, but I think as Ben just kept looking at that, they introduced the idea that we would do a single shot as well that went all the way from Sweat's cell
To the manhole.
to popping out in the manhole in the intersection 2 blocks from the prison, which was the first shot we did of Sweat's run because we were up there in the summertime. So coming out of the thing, and then it was all reverse engineered. And it was funny because we were in a meeting, the umpteenth meeting for Sweat's Run at one point, and it's just like it dawned on me that we have Sweat's Run, the amount of attention and detail that went into that, and then we had the rest of the 8 hours to deal with because it felt like that they were equally.
And that wasn't even the real one.
No, exactly.
I think the most, literally claustrophobic part of it is when he's in the pipe.
Oh yeah.
So how did you guys build that and film that?
It was a common. They were real steam pipes that we orchestrated. A lot of it was storyboarded within an inch of its life, so that and there was also the sense of safety and also claustrophobia. We created hatch camera ports and also just actor ports, so that if they ever got, quite honestly, Benicio had a moment where we all discovered his sense of claustrophobia because he stuck his head in there for the first time and just sort of backed up and. It was like no,
thank
no,
you.
Ben. Ben. So we created a cardboard version for him that was slightly larger, and so that he could just deal with his stuff. Paul was amazing with what he did. You get used to it. When we tested sonotubes just to figure out what size they would be, what would work, what the effect of it all was, and I was the first person to go into. I was in one end and Ben was in another one, and.
So you both were in it.
We were both in the tube at one point, and it's kind of, at first, even in a piece of cardboard that's 15 feet long, you think, I'm going to lose my mind. But then you just trust it. You realize, all right, it's not going to collapse on you, and as long as the steam doesn't come down the thing, in the real pipe, it starts to, I was taking laying in the position and imagining, and it cradles your back, and it's, a little comfortable, and you trust the fact that the thing's not going to collapse on you. But there is a real sense of claustrophobia, and I thought the way they covered that scene was incredible.
Yeah. So now you're out of prison, so what are you working on right now?
I'm currently I'm prepping in Pittsburgh on a film adaptation of Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, the August Wilson play. So we'll see.
So very different from prison.
Completely different.